Welcome back. To our BA Excellence Conference today. Our guests will be Minesh Vadgama, our business analyst leader, and Anna Ustinova as well, lead business analyst. Very welcome. Just to mention quickly, our session will be recorded, so we can find it 1 week from today. Also, feel free to post your questions during the speech on our chat on Google on our community, and the last 15 minutes will be for QA session. So let me introduce our speakers. Minesh Vadgama, lead business analyst, 17 years in roles such consultant, business analyst, business architect, product manager, and Minesh is very excited about the future of business analysis. And please let me introduce also Anna Ustinova, more than 9 years as a business analyst and product owner role. And she is also a strong believer in artificial intelligence can have great impact on our work and life. So stage is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Katerina. So we're here today to talk about how can Chat-GPT affect BA work, quick wins in your daily life. So the agenda for today is very much focused on Chat-GPT rather than broader AI like the previous chat. We're going to go through quickly Chat-GPT, what it is in a quick intro, some productivity gains in roles and industries. We're going to talk about 3 use cases that we have experimented with. We're going to talk about the implications of business analysis in the real world. We're going to give you some tips on prompt engineering, and then we're going to close with a quick conclusion. So we've got a few slides to get through. So first of all, then, let's start with, maybe in the chat, people can put their comments. How many people have used Chat-GPT to date? And if you have used it, how often perhaps are you using it? That would be a great indicator of how this audience has been using the tool already. And of course, if you've not used Chat-GPT, then where have you been? And are you sure you're at the right meeting? Because we're going to be focusing on Chat-GPT today. So, Anna, how are those? Have we got any comments there from people about using it or not yet?
I think not yet. Maybe Katarzyna can help here.
Okay, so let's start with a quick recap on what Chat-GPT actually is, and what better way than to ask Chat-GPT itself what it is. So when we ask Chat-GPT what it thinks it is, it tells us it's an advanced AI model built by OpenAI, which I think most people are aware of. It has an extensive knowledge base, and then it goes on with some other bits and pieces. Now, critically for us, Chat-GPT is basically an AI tool that understands and can respond to natural language. So natural language is the language that we're using right now, so very much conversational and talking. Previously, there were hurdles in understanding this natural language, but Chat-GPT and AI is now able to start understanding natural language. That means it's very, very useful all of a sudden, because it can actually make sense of this conversation, what I'm saying, and respond in a very similar manner. So, it can answer all kinds of questions, from very much business facing to very technical and everything in between. So we know it's obviously a very popular tool. We can see that many people have been using it already, but how popular a tool actually is it? So one way of thinking about how popular it is how long did it take Chat-GPT to reach 1 million users? Again, if anybody wants to hazard a guess, please drop that in the comments. You won't find the answer through Chat-GPT, because obviously it had a knowledge cutoff, but it is quite a surprising answer. So if we think about some of the leading consumer web applications out there, and we look at how long it took them to reach 1 million users, we can see Netflix took around 3.5 years. Kickstarter and Airbnb, around 2.5 years. Twitter, around 2 years. Foursquare, 13 months. Facebook, 10 months. And Dropbox, 7 months. We can see we're dropping down here. So, I don't know if anybody knows the answer to this, but amazingly, Chat-GPT hit 1 million users within 5 days. This was very much the back end of last year. So last year we saw this action, within 5 days it hit 1 million users. But is it still popular? Are people still using it? Should we be thinking about using it? Well, we can answer that by thinking about the current traffic and how it's been performing this year. So currently it has over 100 million monthly active users. In February, it was around 1 billion visits that Chat-GPT got to its site. In March, that went up to about 1.6 billion visits. And in April, it hit 1.8 billion visits. That alone makes it around the 20th most popular website on the internet. So we know Chat-GPT is an amazingly popular tool. Here's what some experts had to say. So in a UBS report, the analyst said, in 20 years following the internet space, we cannot recall a faster ramp in a consumer internet application. So just to give you a view of popularity there. So popularity is great, but what about things like productivity in AI and Chat-GPT? So from productivity perspective, we looked at a number of different reports and news. We also asked some internal EPAMers on what they thought about productivity for tools like AI and Chat-GPT. So we've just plotted here very much an indicative graph of, on the y-axis, an increase in productivity, and on the x-axis we're going to plot some different roles and domains. So in customer services, we read a report where AI tooled customer services agents gained about 14% productivity from using the AI tool. In sales, we came across some reports that said salespeople could benefit by about 40%. A internal senior EPAMer in the product competency told us that they saw benefits around the 40% mark. For software development, we've all come across the tool Copilot or heard about it. In one study, Copilot was responsible for boosting productivity around 55%. We then looked at test, and again, talking to another senior EPAMer and looking at some rates in reports, we saw that this was somewhere between 30 and 60%. But what about BAs? Well, we didn't really find very much out there around business analysis and what BAs could gain in the way of productivity. If you ask us, our opinion internally right now is probably somewhere around the 20 to 30% gain. But one thing is for sure, we can see from this graph that everybody in roles before and after us are gaining from AI and tools like Chat-GPT. So doing nothing is definitely not an option. We need to find a way of leveraging AI and also benefiting from this productivity gain. So thinking about tooling, here's a great graph from Sequoia, who plotted a number of different tools, incumbents, challengers, and Dev 2.0 tools. So we know that things like Copilot are out there for software developers. There are many other tools that are out there from a software engineering, from a technical perspective. But we as BAs, we don't necessarily have a Copilot for like developers do, or Stable Diffusion like art and design people do. So we really don't have that one tool to rule them all for us, for BAs. So, by the very nature of what we do as BAs, it's very broad. We can sometimes focus on detail. So we'd be looking for a tool that could cover a multitude of use cases. And actually, Chat-GPT seems to do that quite well. It's almost like the tool was designed for things that business analysts get up to. So, all the way from ideation to domain upskilling, to feature writing, to hypothesizing benefits, generating and creating statements about value, going into detailed requirements, user story writing, non-functional requirements, and so much more. We're going to look through some of those use cases and talk about how we thought the quality was in respect to how it might be versus another person writing those requirements. There's almost no barrier to entry, literally requires a sign up, and for the paid version, there's obviously more features available in a newer model, but there is a slight cost. So what we're going to do now is talk through 3 top use cases that we've come across and that we wanted to share with you. So for the first use case, over to you, Ada.
Thank you, Minesh. Thank you for the introduction. After it, I think I feel even more excited about the time we are living in, as artificial intelligence and Chat-GPT in particular changing the way how we live, the way how we work, and for business analysts as well. So let's see what first quick win we think that we can gain with Chat-GPT. And we will start with such thing as processing documentation. Why? Because we as business analysts work a lot with documentation, and it takes substantial amount of time to process it, to write it, and so on and so forth. In particular, right now we will be focusing on how to get from user feedback to user stories. Also, we have here a couple of hypotheses which are based on trying to understand if Chat-GPT will consume all the data that we will be giving to Chat-GPT, meaning that it will process it in whole scope and not ignore it somehow, or will it understand some emotional sentiment within it? Will it predict and give us some good suggestions how to improve it? Also, I believe people here already know that OpenAI recently released new features such as browsing via internet. It's possible with ChatGPT 4. And again, I was curious to see how well it works in comparison to just copy pasting information into ChatGPT. So here we will have two use cases. First use case, where we gather our feedback manually from different sources, from online platforms, whatever, then creating a prompt and copy paste it into ChatGPT dialog, and then refine our prompts all over again to get a better output. The other use case will be completely in ChatGPT, where we will ask ChatGPT, first we will enable the feature of browsing, then ask ChatGPT to review certain website with the reviews and get us the summary, and we will also review and working with the outputs. So for the purpose of this video, we will be using feedbacks from such online resources, SiteJabber for Netflix, because we want to take some information that's available online for everyone, because you might know that ChatGPT is not the very securest place to work with for now, but still we can work with it if something is available online. So we got the feedback from there. We took a feedbacks from past months, and we took the feedback with the different star ratings, so we can ensure that there will be positive, negative feedback, and so on. Also, the next step will be we will select what feature we would like to work with, whether we work with default ChatGPT, and you will see it always on the left side on the screen, and the version into comparison to it, we ask the same prompts to ChatGPT with enable browsing feature via Bing. And what prompts we're going to ask? We will ask all the same prompts, like we will ask for the summary for this review, we will ask for suggestions for improvements and then categorization of them. Then we ask to write stories, different perspective, different roles to see how it works within this context, and predict feedback. So let's look into first thing. First, I would like to mention here, you can see the prompt on the left is very big, and it was just cut by me because I used there 15 different reviews. And on the right hand side, very small prompt that was saying, please do the reviews overview and give me a summary of them for the last months. Here is the link, please scroll it. That's it. You can see that on the left hand side, it's very long, so it takes much more tokens to process it compared to using just browsing feature. And let's see what the answers will be for that. In terms of the answers, you can see that on the left, it gave me all summaries for all the feedbacks I put into it. It amazingly added me user sentiment right away. It understands whether it's negative, whether it's positive, or even mixed. What I don't like in particular in here, that some feedback has more than one issue, and it does not put me some bullet points or numbers 1 to 3, but nevertheless there is definitely some room for improvements, but I can read it still. For instance, number 7 has complained about pricing, about content, and site streaming performance. Okay, so it's 3 in 1 and all negative. Then on the right hand side, we can see that it actually gave us just 5 summaries out of 52 available on the website for this particular month. Somehow it selected those 5, and then it also gave explanation of feedbacks and reviews afterwards, but that's it. Like, it's very generic. So basically, do some job behind the scene, and that's how it is. Like, well, we accept to see more maybe. Next, we are asking, okay, let's go with improvements, and please categorize them, whether it's business rule, business process, tech, content, or whatever else, in a table format. With the table format, it works good. However, you can see that, again, everything that was manually entered, again, I received suggestion for each and every feedback. And compared to the browsing version, I have it, again, generalized summaries of all improvements we need to do by the certain areas. So we need to do improvements in business rules, we need to do improvements with content strategy, different improvements, we need to do improvements in tech, and so on. But like, this is much shorter a version compared to the one I have on the left. Moving next, let's imagine that I would ask as a Chat-GPT to pretend that he's a technical system analyst and he needs to write stories only for tech improvements. So I would expect that everything that is not tech would not be taken into consideration, and write requirements as detailed as possible. What I will get? I will get on the left-hand side, again, very good example, that I have user story for review 4, and then I have user story for review 7. Review 7, as you remember, it's the one that we have 3 complaints. 1 complaint about pricing, 1 complaint about content, and 1 complaint about performance and streaming. So it takes only streaming performance as an issue, technical one, and write me a user story for it. Within the acceptance criteria, it specifies me even some measures, which may be good, maybe not. It's still, we need still to discuss it with development team, but I pretty much appreciate that it tells me, like, okay, buffering time should not exceed more than 5 seconds. That's something that I can start working with, and I'm better prepared for further talks with development or even end users, real end users in real life. Then we have the version on the right, where we have also good enough acceptance criteria, also improving stream stability, but, well, less measurements, but still okay. Important thing in here, when I review all the stories that I would like to see there, Chat-GPT missed 1 story on parental settings where it needs to be improved, so you still need to be cautious of that. Then, like, I decided, okay, I want to talk with my development team, but let's see what they need to do to implement those requirements that already in there. So I'm trying to be prepared 1 step ahead. So I asked ChatGPT, imagine that he is right now a technical development lead, so what acceptance and technical requirements he will write to it based on the best practices. Again, it gives us some, with technical requirements, I would say more broader answers, but it gives me an idea of protocols, of systems, everything that might be considered by development team. And if I don't know some abbreviation or anything, what does this particular thing do, I can check it out before meeting my development team. So I will be better prepared, right? And what I like here in particular about browsing example, that it generates me all requirements at once. So it took my acceptance criteria generated before, and for each of those items, it creates technical requirements, which is good. So it's matching, and I have everything at once. I don't need to ask ChatGPT right now to aggregate all together or do it manually. I find it impressive. And last but not least, what about a feedback that we can predict? So I asked to predict positive feedback because I like to hear something positive, and negative feedback. Negative feedback, I'm in particular interested in it because from it I can see if I missed some requirements or if there is certain test cases we could consider before going live with the feature that we improved. And again, manual version did better, slightly better than browsing right now, because in manual version, I have feedbacks only for those tech improvements that we will be doing. While the browsing version have the feedbacks for all the requirements that was actually, sorry, not requirements, all the reviews that was actually on the website, and it's for the first time ChatGPT put all of those reviews and suggested feedbacks for it if all of it will be improved, which is, well, still some improvement needed there, but that's interesting thing to be seen. Last but not least, as long as I play with it quite a long time, please do not use the same prompt over and over again, because the more you use the same prompt, the less relevant output you will get. Somehow ChatGPT believes that if you're using the same prompt, the answer is not good enough. So it tries different approaches, and eventually it gives you the answer like far away from what you want to see. As a conclusions, I want to highlight one of all of those bullet points is that right now we were showing you example where we take the data that is available on the web outside there freely. However, we also work with our data from the projects, and we do a lot of sanitization data before put it into ChatGPT, even though we have all the features and saving the history of, we do sanitization. And interestingly, ChatGPT understands it and creates a so fictional output. So the learning from there, if you're putting sanitized data, please provide as strict as possible guidelines on content output if you want to get it right. Otherwise, you will get a very nice fairy tale. So Minesh, over to you and your use cases.
Thank you, Anna. That was great. So the next use case we're going to talk about is meeting transcript to backlog. So what actually happened in this use case is we took a hypothesis of how good would ChatGPT be at taking a transcript from a meeting, interpreting that content, and then generating some user stories from the back of that. How good would it be at creating some acceptance criteria which are detailed enough to possibly be used? And then thirdly, how about the non-functional requirements, even when we're not going to discuss non-functional requirements in this hypothetical meeting? Was it able to come away and generate them? Now, what I'd say about this hypothesis and this experiment is actually I did this before I've used and learned some of the prompt engineering techniques that Anna is going to talk through and that I'll talk through later on in this session. So it's very much as a novice or a newbie. And so, you know, the learning curve very much was really low. You're going to see how low it was because you're going to see my prompts and you're going to see how good the response from ChatGPT was. So the first step of this process is something that's very familiar to probably all of the BAs out there, which is to conduct a meeting with your stakeholder or your product owner or your product manager about a particular topic. So in this case, we invented a hypothetical situation where we were discussing a product review feature for an e-commerce website. So entirely made up, nothing to do with any client or anything like that, literally just a feature for product reviews on an e-commerce website. So I'm going to show you the video afterwards, but we had that meeting in Microsoft Teams with transcription switched on. So the script was recorded. After we got that, we took the script and we downloaded that from Microsoft Teams as a Microsoft Word doc. And then as simple as that, we copy and pasted that transcript into ChatGPT with a bunch of prompts to get some answers. And then we refined that output. And that was pretty much the end. The whole thing from end to end literally took around 10 or 15 minutes to start with, to get the ChatGPT to generate those user stories and acceptance criteria and artifact that I'm going to show you. And actually, you know, like I say, it's a very common situation with BAs. BAs are doing this all day, all the time. So here's the video. I'm not going to play the actual video for you, but just to say that the video was very much in natural language. You know, it wasn't, we weren't making any particular prompts or any particular, you know, cues or clues for the tool. We very much had a normal conversation, just like you would with any stakeholder. And we started going through all the details of what we want. So to start with then, the first prompt that I put in there with the transcript was create all user stories from the discussion between the PO and the BA from the meeting, from the transcript of the following meeting. And amazingly, Chat-GPT responded with 12 user stories just off the back of that conversation. I want to stress again, no external or additional manipulation, literally just taking that transcript and copy pasting it into Chat-GPT with that prompt. We then looked at, you know, what the responses were, and we ranked them on 2 dimensions. So the first dimension was validity. So this is how plausible or how valid is that requirement? How realistic is it? Is it believable? And then the second dimension was accuracy. This is how faithful or true to the transcript and the actual meeting conversation was the requirement. So here we can see from accuracy, it's, you know, did we actually have that conversation? Did this requirement actually come out? And validity was, regardless of whether we had the conversation, is this a good requirement? Is it believable? Could it pass in the real world? And when we scored it, amazingly, Chat-GPT scored a pass on everything. So all of the user stories that it generated were valid. They were all accurate in terms of being true to what was discussed in the conversation. There was one gap. It did miss one user story, but arguably, how many BAs out there have had requirement sessions and come away of, you know, 12 or 13 requirements out of 13, you know? So, you know, missing one requirement we thought wasn't bad at all. This was, and I'll just be clear, it was reviewed by a number of different BAs as well. So they all concurred on the opinion here. The next thing we did was to then take those acceptance criteria, take those user stories and try and build some acceptance criteria. So of course, we know the user stories that it generated were pretty good. They were high level, but good and all accurate. And so how would it perform with then taking those user stories, developing acceptance criteria, and also asking questions? So, you know, part of what we do as BAs is ask a lot of questions about things that are not clear. And so we wanted to use the tool to try and emulate that kind of behavior and that kind of thinking. So how did it do? Well, it actually did quite well. It generated a bunch of acceptance criteria, and also it came with a number of different questions and comments. It started here on the scoring, did start to fall off. It wasn't as good as it was at the high level. So obviously now we've gone down a layer and we've gone into a bit more depth. And Chat-GPT here starts to, you know, have expressed some cracks and flaws in its reasoning. So for example, on one of the questions here, which was on user story 3, in the transcript that the other person and I had, there was a question about how would we rate the fit, and then the criteria that I prescribed was it runs small, it runs large, or it fits just right. But here in this requirement and this acceptance criteria, we can see that Chat-GPT missed that, and it actually put a score of 1 to 5 in. So while it was valid, it was a believable requirement, it wasn't faithful to the actual transcript and what was discussed here. So at this point, it started breaking away, but still, you know, some really good answers, some great responses, and a good starting point for us. Just the same caution about the user story that I was missing in the past. From here, the next step then was to try and generate some non-functional requirements. Now, the thing I want to say about non-functional requirements in this case is that we didn't discuss any non-functional requirements. So previously, we had discussed the user stories and potentially some of the acceptance criteria that may have fell into those user stories. So Chat-GPT was taking that transcript and generating those user stories and acceptance criteria from things we had said. Okay, but now we came to non-functional requirements. We didn't discuss any non-functional requirements. We didn't stipulate any non-functional requirements. So we were in the hands of purely generative AI at this point, based on the conversation that it understood. One of the techniques that I'd used here, unknowingly at the time, was something called one-shot prompting. So that meant I gave it an example of something that I was looking for. So in here, I've asked for non-functional requirements, and I've said, here's an example of the kind of thing that I'm looking for. How did Chat-GPT do? Well, it came up with a bunch of non-functional requirements, which actually was pretty good. They were all fairly relevant. We didn't rank this on accuracy because we hadn't discussed it. And so there was no point trying to score from accuracy because none of these things were discussed. We did, however, score it roughly on validity. And from a validity perspective, it did not do a bad job. It could have done worse. It could have had, very theoretical NFRs, but actually most of the NFRs were reasonable. They weren't far off where we needed to take them. Some of them were partial passes. One was a complete fail. So overall, we were quite impressed. What we did next was then try and come up with a scoring summary. The scoring summary was quite strict. We didn't support partial pass. And so anything that was even a partial pass or a partial fail was attributed as a fail. And that's the way we looked at it. So on the first question about generating user stories, it did really well, as we saw. It only missed out one user story. So we gave it a response validity of 92% and a response accuracy of 92% as well. On the second question, here we start to see the scores drop a bit. This is where we went to a bit more level of detail, where we started talking about the acceptance criteria and questions that are going to be asked by us towards the PO or the product director. The next point was summarizing any gaps from the transcript. So this one I didn't actually show, but this was asking for, what else is missing? Is there anything else we should think about? What else is there that goes on the roadmap? It was those sort of questions. And again, similar to the acceptance criteria, it performed reasonably well, but not as great as the first question. And then finally, the NFR point, which was, really we could only score it on validity. So what we ended up there was a score for validity of about 75%. So this, it aligns very much with other people's findings outside in using ChatGPT in the wild outside, which is that it can come up with plausible, realistic sounding answers, i.e. the validity of 75%, but the accuracy, 63%, shows that actually the things that it came up with were not necessarily faithful or true to what was discussed. So this was the one thing that we wanted to highlight here. But overall, we thought this was good, and we were impressed by the scores and how it performed. The few limitations we had, this was a short 11-minute meeting. How would it perform if there was much more text and it was a longer meeting for 30 or 40 or 50 minutes? The complexity was probably quite low. The feature itself for a product review is probably quite easy to understand. We're not sure how it would perform with more abstract and complex requirements. There were only 2 people in the meeting. Often we know that's not the case. In the world of BAs, we may have a committee of people who are generating requirements. So I'm not sure how it would pull out and review and help us with that kind of complexity. There's also, things like whether accents or dialogues make a slight difference, but we're at the mercy of MS Teams for the transcription service. So where could we have taken this any further? We probably could have dived into something like Gherkin. So Gherkin syntax, using given, when, then. But I think we wanted to kind of prove that at least in the main areas that we produce daily requirements, it was definitely something that was really valuable. So thinking about additional areas, where else could ChatGPT help? Well, we know the breadth of ChatGPT's capabilities are huge. It can support, business-facing and very strategic, fuzzy, vague problems, all the way through to very technical, detailed, low-level coding kind of problems. But just because we can use it for that, it doesn't mean we should. In our experiments, of course, user stories were really well put together. The acceptance criteria was good, so we think you should use it for that. Using it for follow-up questions, non-functional requirements, and probably even Gherkin, although we didn't use Gherkin in this scenario. Outside of this, we have used it, and it has been good. So these are all, typically within the realm of what we call a BA scope. And I would say, aim for getting your gains in these areas. So use ChatGPT at this point to get gains here. Focus on the things that you already do as a BA and try and get the gains from those rather than focusing on other areas. We know that Chat-GPT is an awesome tool. We know it can do step definitions in code. We know it can start writing the test automation code. We know it can write the actual code. The challenge with all those things is how are you going to debug that, right? So as a BA, are you confident enough to start looking at step definitions or test automation code or actual underlying code and debug it? Are you able to think about how that code that you've just produced is going to integrate into a broader code base? Answer is most likely to be no for most BAs out there. So we'd probably suggest that, stay away from those particular scenarios because they are going to lead you into an area of experimentation. We think experimentation is good and we do recommend it, but very much in a controlled way. The paradigm of what a BA is, how a BA works, and with the intersection of AI is definitely going to change. So I'm sure over the few years, we're going to see the paradigm change of how BAs work, what we do, how we do it, which tools we use. But right now, I'd probably say if you're using Chat-GPT, focus on the green areas where we know you're doing these day in, day out, and you can see value, and probably experiment with the red areas, but don't make any commitment towards those. So overall then, from that use case, our learnings were that, Chat-GPT did an excellent job of taking that 11-minute video and turning that into requirements. There was very minimal prompting required, and we're able to go from a conversation on Microsoft Teams all the way through to some user stories, acceptance criteria, and non-functional requirements, right? The validity of the output, of course, this is something we're going to keep on coming back to. It was good, but we have to make sure that whatever's being put into your artifact and being confirmed as final is actually true to what your stakeholders are asking for and actually meets the business objectives. We need to make sure that we're not seeing Chat-GPT invent things and then playing that back as, oh, this is what we thought you wanted. The final thing on that is, overall reasonable quality, but definitely requires further review. The one thing we want to say here again is be careful with the data confidentiality and privacy. We're very aware that Chat-GPT, like was said in the previous example, it could be leaking information. We're not sure exactly how the data is being used. We're told, you have a toggle switch for training, but we're not sure just yet. It's a very new tool. So I'd probably exercise a bit of discretion with regard to confidentiality and data that you put into the tool. So that was our second use case. The third use case is all about connecting Chat-GPT to the internet and using a plugin called Show Me Diagrams. So question I want to ask is, of course, a number of you said, yes, you are using Chat-GPT, but how many people have used or are aware of what a Chat-GPT plugin is? And maybe we'll come back and have a look at the comments because we understand the take-up in plugins is generally quite low. So plugins are tools that are designed to help Chat-GPT access kind of up-to-date info, run computations, use third-party services, and basically they offload a task to a third-party service to do something, right? So the one thing that we want to start with, and Anna already showed you this, was Chat-GPT has the power to talk to the internet, and it can do that through a plugin or a feature called Browse with Bing. So here, if you have Chat-GPT and you're a paid member, you'll find that, and I'll do this very quickly over the live example. So if you go to Chat-GPT, and most people probably have 3.5, but if you hit 4 and you hit Browse with Bing, this is now connected to the internet. So if I put in here something like, what was EPAM's share price at close yesterday, it will actually go ahead and go and query on the internet the price of EPAM shares for yesterday, and then come back and give us an answer. So it's doing that, as you can see right now. It's clicked on the link here. It looks like it's gone to Yahoo Finance. It's doing a bit of thinking, and then the closing price of EPAM share was $227 yesterday. And if I hit that link, it takes me to the source, which was Yahoo Finance. So of course we know there's a cutoff, but this is a really powerful way of letting Chat-GPT actually talk to the internet and go away and bring back live information for things that you're asking it. The next plugin that we wanted to talk about was the Show Me plugin. So the Show Me plugin is, I'll just skip ahead here. The Show Me plugin is a plugin that actually allows ChatGPT to do some diagramming and some drawing. So in the example on the left-hand side, I asked ChatGPT to draw a class diagram for a product review feature. Here you can see the description of the prompt. And amazingly, it has gone away and it's created a class diagram. You can see correctly put a class name. It's got the class attributes. It's got the operations and methods. It also goes and puts in the association between those classes. It's also capable of doing other diagrams. Those that I've tried so far include sequence diagrams, use case diagrams, and activity diagrams. So if your project requires you, or if you're sort of blurring the boundaries and starting to work more in a UML and in a dev way, then this is a great tool to start using for creating some of those diagrams from scratch as well. And then the second use case on this Show Me Diagrams tool was actually a really good one for ideation and to give you a head start when you're starting on a new thing or a new piece of work. So in this case, I simply put in a query, which was create a brainstorm for an e-commerce website's features. Immediately, ChatGPT has gone ahead and generated this really colorful, brainstorm, and it's put about 30 different things on there. Any BA who's worked in ecom will probably be able to look at this and say, yeah, some of that is actually really valid and some of it probably not so much. Nonetheless, if this was a topic that you weren't familiar with and you were a BA coming into an e-commerce landscape, this is probably going to be a really helpful tool and a really helpful way to get you started. You can then take this and do your product breakdown structure or your work breakdown structure or whatever else that you're going to use for your next technique for decomposition. Beyond this, you can actually use the Mermaid editor. You can see here there's a click to edit, and you can actually go ahead and edit. The one thing that I didn't show you guys was how you quickly access a plugin. So here's another ChatGPT window, and if you simply click up here, you go to plugins, you're going to see a whole bunch of plugins when you go to the plugin store, and there are hundreds already out there. And just like you'd probably expect, you need to install a plugin into your ChatGPT, and you can also uninstall. There is a finite number of plugins that you can have running at any one time. You can see I've got Show Me Diagrams, Link Reader, Scholar, Prompt Perfect all installed. You can just as easily uninstall by pressing that and press install to add a new plugin. So that's very much plugins. I would really encourage people to go ahead and experiment more with plugins because they're a very powerful tool. So the final thing I want to say is another plugin or feature, which is called ChatGPT Code Interpreter. I don't know if many of you have come across this. It's very selective in which users are getting this. I can't influence it, so there's no wait list. But basically, it's a super powerful code interpretation tool. If you've watched any videos on YouTube, it's very exciting because it can let you upload Excel files full of data into ChatGPT. ChatGPT can then actually read the content of those files. It can then, off the back of its own understanding, go and create graphs, presentations, go and perform meaningful trend analysis on that data, and then even let you modify the file through ChatGPT and then spit out a downloadable Excel file from the one that you put in. So that is a really exciting prospect, and so keep your eyes out for when that lands. Over to you now, Anna, for another quick look.
Yeah. So everything that we were talking till that moment was, I would say, tactical thing that every BA can do, and it depends on actually BA and the context in what he or she is working, because something might be applicable, some is not. But we decided also to look a bit broader because we can use something and we cannot. That's why it's also, there is no measurements available out there if we can get some improvement in time in terms of our work. So we decided to look into process, and we gathered together, me and Minesh, and also the big group of business analysts from one of our account to brainstorm if it's possible to improve business analysis process so that we can get this gain in there. We do a survey, we run a workshop, we come up with 41 ideas. quite a lot, and afterwards we need to filter down. We run like numbers of voting session, and we come up with 3 ideas in the end. However, one idea that got the most votes was not, let's say, focused just on the requirements, just for the business analyst, but has a bit broader implication. It was management of internal knowledge. So interestingly, later we found also the research done by McKinsey Digital Group that it confirms that it's really the area where generative AI can support you a lot, and it will revolutionize the way we currently work with knowledge management systems. So if you haven't thought about it, maybe it's also the area where you can get some gains. And now let's move a bit to prompt engineering technique. First of all, I think that business analysts are naturally more better prompt engineers, because for us it's important to be specific. For us, it's important to know the contents of the things that we are working with. Also, we often need to explain to our stakeholders step by step different things, and we set a tone how something should be done. How do we work with one stakeholder and how we do work with the other stakeholder? So it's all natural to us, I think. However, there is certain thing that can optimize the way we prompt it, and we can achieve with that better results. So let's go with let's take a look into some of these concepts. I would like to focus right now on 3 of them, which we already start talking about, which is zero-shot learning, one-shot learning, and few-shot learning. Most of the examples that we were showing to you today, it was zero-shot learning, except this one nice prompt that Minesh showed you with NFR sample. It was one-shot learning. So what are those things? With zero-shot learning, we are giving Chat-GPT zero context, and we just ask the question and believe that it will come up with the answer. So there will be a lot of creativity in there, and this is suitable for several use cases for business analysis, like brainstorming, and if you're doing SWOT analysis, pastel analysis, it's somewhere where you can get advantage of it. The one-shot learning, it's somewhere where you would like to tailor a bit the answer, get some more predictable answer from ChatGPT than with zero-shot. So it might be benchmarking analysis, or even the very same non-functional requirements that was already there. And few-shot learning, it's where you would like to have a structured answer in specific way, so you already know what you would like to get. So for that purpose, you need to be very specific and give several examples so ChatGPT can learn what you want from it, because it might not know what's good user stories for you. So you might give several examples of user stories with acceptance criteria. Other than that, if you don't, you will get 5 bullet points at best, and it will be kind of okay, but maybe you would like to have more. Why it's important? Because like if you're not using proper technique tailored to your request, you might get very frustrating answers, or you would spend lots of time on prompting to get the answer you would like to. And now I will show you the case when you will really get some metaphorical story. So Q&A, it's the best works, it says, with few-shot learning. I decided like how bad it could be with zero-shot learning. So I asked ChatGPT to pretend that he is very intelligent chatbot that knows everything about business analysis, and if I ask some nonsense, tell me that it's unknown. So I ask a nonsense. What is banana story? And surprisingly, it tells that it's not a nonsense. It's a commonly used term in business analysis, project management, and software development, where it's the story that client asks you as a business analyst for a banana, and you, together with the development team, delivers that banana for the client. However, it was not a banana. It should be a banana shake. Yeah, sounds metaphorical, sounds plausible, but it's very good lie. So I tried to see like what's the difference between one shot and few shot. In this case, I would say that for me it was not so much of a difference. Both work better than zero shot learning. So that was my learnings in there. Please be careful how you prompted in order to get better results. So Minesh, final tips?
Sure, thanks Anna for that great stuff there. So a few final tips that we wanted to share with you that we've come across. So reflection. Reflection is asking Chat-GPT to reflect on the answer that it's given you, and it should actually be able to tell you whether or not the response matches the question that you asked. So it's almost like it has the ability after the fact to have a look and critically evaluate its own answer. Like Anna said earlier, be careful because there can be some dilution if you keep asking it, but at least for the first 1 or 2 passes, it will be able to detect if it's told you what you are looking for or whether it's told you something else. The second thing, which is really interesting, is ask it to become an expert. So from a really great video by Andrej Karpathy of OpenAI, he goes over how AI works and how Chat-GPT works. And it's really looking to imitate a number of different answers from a spectrum of answers, right? So it's looking for high quality and low quality, and it's responding accordingly. Now, what he said was that if you tell Chat-GPT to act as an expert or tell it that it has a high IQ, it actually doesn't need to sample the lower quality responses, and it will go straight to the higher quality or the better answers, right? So in this way, if you tell it it's an expert, it will then behave as an expert, and somehow this provides better quality answers. Be careful with the IQ thing because it's a double-edged sword here. If you ask it to have an IQ which is too high, maybe 200, 150, 170, it might start going into, theoretical astrophysics and take you in the realm of some sci-fi movie. But you need to find the sweet spot of what the IQ is or what type of expert you want it to be to get the right answer. The other thing that we wanted to give you as a final tip was this idea of chain of thought. So chain of thought is the idea that by allowing Chat-GPT to think through answers step by step, you're going to get a better response. And actually that is something that was reported, and we have seen it in a few papers. So what here we can see in this table is by asking Chat-GPT something like, let's work this out in a step-by-step way to be sure that we have the right answer, had an 82% accuracy response versus a zero shot. So that was where there was no context or nothing given, just a straight blank question. There's a sliding scale of improvement here in terms of how good the answer is from an accuracy perspective based on the prompt. So, the thing is here, if you're not getting the answer that you're looking for, or it's coming out with some jargon, try the step-by-step approach, which is referred to as chain of thought, and you might get a better result. The cautions that we wanted to leave you with are, scattered all over the internet. You're going to find them everywhere, but I think it was important to, make sure we're clear on these because we also agree with these. First of all, it's an excellent and confident liar. So be careful and watch out for the lies that it creates. You've got to make sure you double check your content. It can be biased because of the training data and what it's looked at and how it works. Often there are reasoning errors, and so maybe the step-by-step could help you with that, but you're still going to find some types of problem are going to have a struggle, and those will be sort of certain reasoning errors. So step-by-step seems to work with some of that stuff. There are knowledge cutoff dates, which we're all aware of, but you can try and connect it to Bing and help it get some internet knowledge where you need to. The training data is obviously limited. It wasn't trained on an infinite amount of data. So what it knows, but there are things that it won't know. And again, things like the internet could help it with that. Sometimes it can fabricate stuff. So this is slightly different to lying, but it will just fabricate, it will make up a response to a law or a regulation or a standard or something like that. And you just have to double check that. And then finally, the confidentiality, the point we mentioned earlier. We'd be very cautious about what you put into this tool right now. Probably advise you to switch the training feature off, so you're not giving your information, your data back to OpenAI to train with. But even after all of that, we think it's a wonderfully powerful and vastly amazing tool. just like the hand or the Thanos's Infinity Gauntlet from the Infinity Wars and the Avengers movies, you know, it is really a vastly powerful tool. And perhaps there's more to come, but Chat-GPT is just one of those stones, like one of those rings, and, you know, we'll see more. But for now, while we've got it, we think it's a good tool. It's a game changer. So the quick wins we looked at today were: how do you generate requirements from feedback, which Anna talked about earlier? How can you generate requirements from a transcript, which is what I talked about? How do you connect ChatGPT to the internet? How can you use plugins to offload special tasks, like make it do diagrams? And then finally, you know, using prompt engineering techniques for optimal outputs, which we hope you experiment with. The final bits of things we want to say is make sure you exercise human judgment and oversight. So, you know, don't take whatever it says as the truth. Make sure you critically evaluate and review what it's telling you, because often it will lie and fabricate things. Also, just because you can do something with ChatGPT doesn't mean you should. So, you know, going back to the example of writing code, you know, BAs writing code, probably not the best, you know, use of our time, but maybe in the future, as the paradigm changes and we start to move more towards maybe a low code world, then possibly. But right now, probably stick to the core BA areas. And then experiment. So just because we don't do something today doesn't mean we shouldn't try and do it, but I would do it in a controlled experimentation way, rather than making it your day job to start writing code or step automation code or things like that. And then the final thing that we want to leave you with is a quote from a director at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI. And that is, "I don't think the generative AI is going to replace workers, but workers who work with generative AI will replace those who don't." And we're fully in agreement with that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, great speakers, for great speech. We have some notes and questions yet on our chat. If I could jump to them quickly. So one was a suggestion that it's good to, when working with requirements, to explicitly mark ideas and it enrich the content of GPT response. And we have also the note that someone wondered if the working with generating from the transcript from the stakeholders workshop, if there could be more domain specific and particular product specific, how it could be performing. And you can comment on this if you want. We have also another question about sensitive information. Not much time on answers, but maybe.
Yeah, so the data sensitivity obviously is a very important point. I would be very careful about what you put into ChatGPT. Make sure, in any case, you know, that training data is switched off. In our cases, it's been sanitized information. It does take away from the meaning of the content, and so we sometimes do lose the essence of the requirement, but it's still good for, you know, an indicative view. There are various things in play at the moment around how can we use ChatGPT in real world, actual business and client ways. Sometimes we get permission for that sort of thing, and where we get permission, it's actually useful. Where we don't get permission, you know, you've got to be very careful about how you're using it, if at all you're using that tool. So I think I caught that question. Anna, I don't know if you want to respond to any of the other ones.
No, thank you. That's good.
I think there was one other question, which was about BAs being replaced someday. I don't think we will, but I think the paradigm will just change. So perhaps, you know, we will have a slightly different role. We may be, you know, doing things with a level of abstraction where we're writing features and requirements that can be translated into code in natural language. You know, it's a very exciting future for BAs nonetheless. Thank you.
Thank you, Minesh. Thank you, Anna, for interesting speech on and sharing your knowledge and experience on trends and usage and use cases in BA work. Thank you, the audience, for watching and asking questions. You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.